everyone, Chris here, and right now, this minute that this video is released, the embargo on the 2024 Player's Handbook that I have had since pretty close to the beginning of June has been lifted, and so now I can start telling you what's actually in this book exactly, and that's what I intend to do. I got this book in early June, as I said, and throughout June, what I did is I went through it page by page, and I compared everything to the old Player's Handbook and to the playtest, and I looked for anything that had been removed or added or changed, and made notes on all of it so that I could give you comprehensive videos telling you exactly what to expect from this new Player's Handbook. And that's what I did in July. I've been a very busy July. I have 20 videos, including this one, already banked, ready to release to you, and you are going to see them in machine gun fashion. So, video today will cover all the main rules changes to the bones of the rules in the new Player's Handbook. I'm going to show you up on screen exact wording so you know exactly what is there. And then tomorrow, we're going to start talking about spells. Then on Saturday, another video. And then next week, 4 more. And the week after that, 4 more. And 4 more every week until September 17th, which is the official release date of the Player's Handbook. And I have planned it so that you will have all the videos that I had planned for covering the new Player's Handbook before that date. Like, just barely. Now, the reason I decided to cover rules first is so that if you don't buy the new Player's Handbook, but you do find yourself playing with people who are using the new Player's Handbook, you could use a character with the old rules. We've been told you can do this. And play with the people using the new rules. And what this video will cover is all the rules changes that you need to know for that. As for the character building stuff, that's all going to come, but it will come later. Now, when this video comes out on August 1st, I am currently in British Columbia, which is a long way from where I live, in New Brunswick, 4 time zones, because I'm visiting my parents, and that is precious time to me, and that means I'm not going to be spending all day going through comments to these videos, so I know that you can have lots of questions in the comments. I'm going to try to answer some of them, but I can't spend a whole bunch of time on it. So don't expect as much reaction from me or responses from me in the comments until August 8th, because August 8th, then I'm back home, and every video that's released after that, I absolutely will be involved in as many comments, answering as many questions as I possibly can, because I want you guys to have the answers to your questions. Now, I'm going to be going over all kinds of stuff in the new Player's Handbook, and I'm not just going to talk about it. I'm going to show you up on the screen the exact wording of every feature, every subclass, every spell that I go over, so you can read it for yourself and see exactly how it is worded in the new Player's Handbook. In some cases, I've done it in a Google Doc so that it can have a background and look pretty, but I didn't have time to do that for everything, so some of it you're going to be looking at a PDF with watermarks. It's not as pretty, but at least you can see the features as they're presented in the book. So here's what's coming. There's going to be 5 videos covering spells, including over 60 spells. I'm going to show up on the screen. No, you're not going to see all 300 spells. That I just don't have time to do that. But I'm going to show you all the important changes that I noted, all the things that I thought should have changed that didn't, as well as things that got changed that I just thought was interesting. I'm going to show you every new spell. I'm going to show you every cantrip. Then we're going to go over feats, and I'm going to show you every single feat that's in this book, whether it's an origin feat, a general feat, a fighting style feat, or an epic boon feat. That's going to be 6 videos to cover all of that stuff. We're going to have a video covering every species, a video covering every background, a video covering every warlock invocation, video covering every meta magic option. There's a video on the warlock and all the warlock subclasses, going over every feature, including changes to the spell list. Same thing for sorcerers. And then I've also done a video for barbarians and for fighters. And then I ran out of time. So there's a few classes that I haven't done videos for yet, but I certainly will have them done well before September 17th so that they can all be released to you before then. So that's a total of 20 videos you're going to see. Here's what I ask. I know most of you are already subscribed. If you are not subscribed, I'm going to ask you to subscribe. I'm pushing for 100,000 subscribers. I think this series of videos could really help me achieve that. Every subscription counts. So if you are not subscribed, if you would subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. Furthermore, 20 videos done already. And if you want to see them today, you can. Because patrons see all these videos today. And without YouTube ads, unless they've been made public. So as soon as a video is public, that's when I monetize it. Until then, patrons can view it without YouTube ads as well. And they can do so for $3 a month. And then if you want to just join, pay your $3, watch the videos, then leave, I'm okay with that, right? They're there for you. So if you want to check them out, my video or my Patreon link is in the video description. And as an exclusive for wizard level or higher level patrons on my Discord, I have chat channels set up for every single class, for feats, for spells, for origins, and for general rules. So if you want to discuss these things or things you see in these videos with other people who've seen them as well, then that's how you would do it. And so just make sure that you're a wizard level patron or higher, and it will give you access. And then you can talk about it with other people on my Discord. So let's get into the rules. Okay, so we're going to go into the rules now. And the first thing I want to cover, because it's one of the most striking changes from the 2024 Player's Handbook. So when I got this new Player's Handbook, first, of course, I skimmed through it. And what was most striking to me wasn't the new stuff. It was the amount of things that are in there. Tons of stuff on classes and subclasses and feats and spells. Not a heck of a lot of base rules. In fact, the amount of base rules have been condensed. So first, I want to talk about stuff that's just not in there anymore. And we're going to begin with ability checks. And the rules for ability check contests are gone. They just do not appear in the new Player's Handbook. Furthermore, the rules on passive checks are gone. Now, in the rules glossary, they talk about calculating passive perception, but nowhere in the entire Player's Handbook does it discuss how that is used or what it is for. High checks no longer use passive perception. Nothing does. So I'm wondering if there is going to be something in the Dungeon Master's Guide for that. I think there must be. Otherwise, why would they bother having you calculate passive perception? But this rule here, by the way, these rules are from the old Player's Handbook. It's not in the new Player's Handbook. And we're still talking about ability checks, group checks, where everybody rolls and then you see how many people succeeded to see if the entire group succeeds. Not there. So ability checks in the old rules, that's an entire chapter. In the new rules, ability checks are covered in 1.5 pages, and that's it. The old rules have a variant rule for encumbrance that I think most tables don't use, though I know some do, where you add up all your weight and then you check it against your encumbrance to see if you're slowed from it. It's not in there. So this is what the Player's Handbook says in regards to encumbrance, or the new Player's Handbook, is the DM figures out if they figure you're carrying too much or you are carrying something too heavy, and if so, then they will go have you check the lifting and carrying rules to see if you can do it. Otherwise, don't worry about it. The rules on squeezing are gone. So the old rules say that if you are moving through an area or end your turn in an area too small, then you have a whole bunch of penalties while you're in that area. So all that is gone. Now the only penalty you face when you move through an area too small for you, or one size too small for you, if it's more than that you can't move through it at all, is that it's treated as difficult terrain. That's it. So your movement speed is halved, but all the advantage and disadvantage, that's all gone. The travel rules also have been condensed, including the rules for a forced march. Those are not in the new Player's Handbook at all. Now, I have to say, I didn't even notice most of this stuff was gone until I really started looking carefully. because most of this is stuff that I seldom, if ever, use. I mean, I don't use encumbrance. I don't use the rules for forced marching, or I guess I do, but they just never come up. So I really think that in most cases, you're not going to even notice that stuff is gone. And there's little things that are gone as well. A lot of text also has been condensed. So you will see something that takes up a lot of room in the old Player's Handbook. It's still there in the new Player's Handbook, but it's been integrated into something else in just a sentence or two that just allows them to have the same amount of rules in a much condensed space. So that is the stuff that's not in the Player's Handbook. Now let's talk about stuff that has changed in the Player's Handbook. On your screen, you're going to see a list of actions available for your character. And by the way, this is word for word from the Player's Handbook. I moved a lot of stuff to a Google Doc with a black background. I just figured it's easier to look at and it's not covered in watermarks, but this is all word for word. So a lot of the actions we can take are the same. The attack action, dash, disengage, dodge, most of the actions are still the same, but there are some changes. For example, if we look under help, it says help another creature's ability check or attack roll, which the old one did, or administer first aid. So if you want to use, a medicine kit or a healer's kit, I should say, then that is the help action now. The reason this matters is because some creatures have bonus actions to do some things and regular actions to do other things, like the thief comes to mind. Well, the thief doesn't have a bonus action help, so they can't use a healer's kit with a bonus action anymore. The hide action is still there, but it has changed. So all it says here is make a dexterity stealth check, which you always did, but let's go over the new hide rules. So here's the hide action. It says with the hide action, you try to conceal yourself. To do so, you must succeed on a DC 15 dexterity stealth check, so it's not based on passive perception, while you're heavily obscured or behind 3/4 cover or total cover. And you must be out of an enemy's line of sight. If you can see a creature, you can discern whether it sees you. On a successful check, you have the invisible condition. Make a note of your check's total, which is the DC for a creature to find you with a wisdom perception check. And this is going to require the search action. We're going to go over that in a bit. By the way, anything written in red is me. The white stuff is actually in the Player's Handbook. The condition ends on you immediately after any of the following occurs. You make a sound louder than a whisper. An enemy finds you. That's the search action. You make an attack roll, or you cast a spell with a verbal component. So if you succeed on the hide action, you gain the invisible condition. So let's look at the invisible condition. While you have the invisible condition, you experience the following effects. Surprise. If you're invisible, when you roll initiative, you have advantage on the roll. I'm going to be circling back to this later in the video. Then concealed. You aren't affected by any effect that requires its target to be seen unless the effect's creator can somehow see you. Any equipment you are wearing or carrying is also concealed. And attacks affected, attack rolls against you have disadvantage, and your attack rolls have advantage. If a creature can somehow see you, you don't gain that benefit against that creature. That's new in the old version because of just, I think, sloppiness or just an error on the part of the designers. Technically speaking, if you had the invisible condition and somebody had the see invisibility spell up, if you play it exactly as the rules are written, they still have advantage to attack you and you still have disadvantage to attack them, which is silly. So they have revised invisible conditions, so that is no longer the case. So circling back to when you're invisible, when you roll initiative, you have advantage on the roll. Notice it says surprise. Let's talk about the rules for surprise, and I think most of these have been revealed already. So these are the rules for surprise. If a combatant is surprised by combat starting, that combatant has disadvantage on their initiative roll. For example, if an ambusher starts combat well hidden from a foe who is unaware that combat is starting, that foe is surprised. So this is it in a nutshell. If the DM determines that someone is unaware that combat is starting, and it might be because somebody is hidden, it might be some other reason, then they have disadvantage on their initiative roll. If someone has the invisible condition when combat is starting, such as through a successful hide action, for example, then they have advantage on their initiative roll. So you have both advantage and disadvantage. However, Being successfully hidden is no longer a requirement to surprise a foe, nor does it automatically mean a foe is surprised. That is all going to be up to the DM. So surprise is going to be a lot less dramatic than it used to be, and the DM is given a little more control over when it occurs. However, your advantage on initiative is solely based on the invisible condition. If you've got it, you get the advantage. If you don't have it, you don't get the advantage. But the disadvantage for the enemy's initiatives, that is totally in the hands of the DM now. There are a couple of new actions here. So the old cast a spell action is now called the magic action. This action now not only includes casting spells, but a lot of other features that are magical and take an action are now called magic actions. For example, if a Psi Warrior uses their action to activate telekinetic movement, which is not a spell, it still uses a magic action. And the old use an object action is now called utilize. So when you take the utilize action, it now specifies that you're utilizing a non-magical object. If it is a magical object, it's going to use the magic action. There was some confusion before with the old rules about whether you could take the use an object action to activate magic items. That's cleared up now. And we have two new actions a character can take. The influence action is what used to make charisma checks or wisdom animal handling checks, and the study action is for intelligence checks. The old search action is now all wisdom checks. So investigation and perception are now different actions. They both used to be the search action, and now they are split up, one with the intelligence skills, the other with the wisdom skills. All right, so a little change to saving throws. Here's the wording in the rules glossary. A saving throw, also called a save, represents an attempt to avoid or resist a threat. You normally make a saving throw only when a rule requires you to do so, but you can decide to fail the save without rolling. The result of a save is detailed in the effect that allowed it. If a target is forced to make a save and lacks the ability score used by it, the target automatically fails. So what is new is that the old rules didn't let you choose to fail a saving throw, though I think a lot of DMs played that way anyways. I don't think I've ever played with a DM who said that you can't automatically fail a saving throw, but that was never in the rules. We just decided it made sense. It is now supported by the rules. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about initiative and what happens if two players or a player and a monster happen to tie on initiative. Here's what happens. If a tie occurs, the DM decides the order among tied monsters, and the players decide the order among tied characters. The DM decides the order if the tie is between a monster and a player character. Now, if any of you are thinking you don't like this rule as much as the one in the 2014 Player's Handbook, where you use dexterity to determine the order, just be aware, that's not a rule. Try looking it up. It's a house rule that, as players and as a community, we kind of came up with and started using en masse. I don't think every table uses it that way, but a lot of tables do, and a lot of players think that it's in the rules. It's not in the rules, so if you want to keep using it, please do. But this is what the actual rule is, and the only difference here, actually, from the 2014 version, is it tells you what happens when a player character and a monster tie, that the DM chooses. The old rules didn't tell you what to do. Now here's a change I really like, moving around other creatures. And I think it's a fairly big change. Moving through allies was considered difficult terrain in the old rules, and it is not in the new rules. Now, you can move through enemies if they're incapacitated, but it is difficult terrain. And you can't willingly end your turn in the space of another creature, which is the same. But if you unwillingly do, then you gain the prone condition unless you're tiny-sized or larger than the other creature. So the big change there is you can move through allies unhindered now, which I like. Just way too many cases where allies get in the way of other allies. And this is just a wording change, but melee weapon attacks and ranged weapon attacks are now gone. They're just melee attacks and ranged attacks. But this idea where you could have a ranged weapon attack with a melee weapon, which doesn't seem to make any sense unless you know exactly what they're talking about and the terminology, that terminology has been removed, so that's not going to come up anymore. Also, this idea of whether unarmed strikes count as melee weapon attacks or attacks with a melee weapon, and you got different answers based on which question you asked, that's gone as well. A lot of people are very interested what happened to mounted combat. Mounted combat got very few changes. The important change is that if you do control a mount, it moves during your turn. And it also takes its dash, disengage, or dodge action on that turn. So that debate at least is over. And there is one other change, but it is extremely minor. If your mount is knocked prone, you must make a DC 10 dexterity save to not fall prone. Before you didn't have to make a saving throw, but you did have to use your reaction to not fall prone. So that's a minor change. The bigger change is the wording for controlled mounts now makes it clear the controlled mount moves and takes its actions on your turn. Otherwise, mounted combat did not change. Underwater combat did have some changes. All attacks underwater have disadvantage unless you have a swim speed, make an attack without a weapon, or make a melee attack with a weapon that does piercing damage, like a spear, for example. Any ranged attack with a weapon now has disadvantage. Sorry, archers. So this is in the rules glossary. Bloodied. A creature is bloodied while it has half its hit points or fewer remaining. And what does this do? It does nothing. Being bloodied doesn't have any game mechanics on its own, but things like the Life Cleric's Preserve Life feature, there's a feature under the Champion Fighter as well, say that you either choose a bloodied creature or you can use it on yourself when it is bloodied. So there's probably going to be monster stuff too, like sharks getting advantage against bloodied targets. That's all Bloodied does. Okay, so if any of you wonder if I really went through the rules with a fine-tooth comb, here is going to be my evidence, because this change is super small and sneaky, but it makes a difference for a certain kind of build. So they do these tiny wording changes that patch up little optimization tricks that we are used to doing, or at least people in the optimization community like myself are used to doing. So I did a video fairly recently on Magic Missile, and I explained the trick to make Magic Missile do really big single target damage is by exploiting this little rules interaction that you're seeing on the screen in white. And Jeremy Crawford is referring to it in the Twitter post that I have up on your screen. So with the Magic Missile rules as written, as in the damage rolls rules on page 196 of your 2014 Player's Handbook, you roll one damage die and you multiply by the number of missiles. Well, they changed the rule so it doesn't apply to Magic Missile anymore. Now the rule applies only to spells with saving throws, which Magic Missile doesn't have. So now with Magic Missile, you're going to roll a d4 for each missile, and that kills the Magic Missile trick. Okay, so we're going to talk about immunity, resistance, and vulnerability, and most of this we know already. If you have resistance to a damage type, you have the damage. If you have vulnerability, you double the damage. And if you have immunity, you take no damage. That much we know. We also know that you can't have multiple sources of vulnerability or resistance. They just don't stack. You either have it or you don't. What we didn't know is if you had resistance and suddenly applied vulnerability, or immunity and suddenly applied vulnerability, what happened? Now the rules tell us. So it says that you can have both resistance and vulnerability to the same damage type. They actually don't cancel out. You can have them both. And basically what you do is you have the damage and then you double the damage, which is kind of the same as not doing any of that. I mean, you might have slight differences because of the rounding rules, but for the most part, you could probably just play it without doing the mathematical calculations and assume that essentially they cancel out, but one doesn't override the other. And immunity trumps everything. If you have immunity and vulnerability to the same damage type, you can ignore the vulnerability because you take no damage. Now, this isn't really a change to the rules as much as an addition to the rules. So in 2014, you can choose to knock out a creature if you would reduce it to 0 hit points with a melee attack. And that is still the case in the 2024 rules. But notice now how it tells you what happens afterwards. The old rules just told you it was unconscious but stable. So they did actually add some rules despite removing or condensing so many of them. Okay, so check this out. Remember this chart? It's in your old player's handbook, and it tells you how long it takes to don or doff armor. Now, tell me, do you wear a shield or do you wield a shield? Because the old rules never seemed to be able to decide, and they constantly went back and forth. The new rules have made a decision. You hold and wield a shield. You do not wear a shield. So the donning and doffing times haven't changed for the armor you wear. Here is the chart. As you can see, they've actually just integrated it into the armor equipment chart. But if we look under light armor, it says 1 minute to don or doff. Medium armor, 5 minutes to don and 1 minute to doff. Heavy armor, 10 minutes to don and 5 minutes to doff. Those are all the same. Under shield, nothing. Nothing to don or doff, because you don't don or doff a shield now. You're going to either, draw it or stow it, just like you would a weapon, and presumably it's just an interaction. And speaking of armor and shields, these are the old rules for armor proficiency. It says anyone can put on a suit of armor or strap a shield to an arm. Only those proficient in the armor's use know how to wear it effectively. Your armor class gives you proficiency with certain types of armor. If you wear armor that you lack proficiency with, you have disadvantage on any ability check, saving throw, or attack roll that involves strength or dexterity, and you can't cast spells. Does this apply to shields or not? It likely does, because at the top it says strap on a shield to an arm, though later it talks about wearing. Are you wearing a shield or are you wielding a shield? Like I said, the old rules couldn't decide. And like I said, the new rules have. So now with armor proficiency, you're going to see light, medium, or heavy armor. If you wear light, medium, or heavy armor and lack training with it, you have disadvantage on any D20 test that involves strength or dexterity, and you can't cast spells, which is essentially the same. Test means ability check, saving throw, or attack roll. But you can see it only applies to light, medium, and heavy armor, which shields aren't. Shields have their own rules. Shield. You gain the armor class benefit of a shield only if you have training with it. That means if you strap on a shield or hold a shield and you're not proficient with it, there's no penalty. You just gain no benefit. Now, presumably, if it's a magical shield and it has some other kind of benefit, you could still technically benefit from that and attune to shields that require attunement. But as far as the +2 bonus to armor class, you're not going to get that unless you're proficient. Okay, so these are the old rules for grenade-like gear like Acid Flask and Alchemist Fire. Holy Water has similar rules, and the way they work is you would make a ranged attack with them and you would treat them as improvised weapons. Why they are improvised weapons when the whole purpose of the item is to use them as a weapon, I'm not sure, but whatever. But here's a little question that has been debated a lot. If it's an improvised weapon, do you add your ability modifier to the damage like you normally do with improvised weapons? And I've seen people argue about that. Well, that's not something you're going to have to worry about anymore. These are the new rules. Holy Water is the same kind of thing. These all require dexterity saving throws now rather than attack rolls. So there's no attack roll, and the DC is based on your dexterity. And yeah, Holy Water, same kind of thing. Still using one attack from the attack action. So if you have extra attack, you don't have to give up your whole action to throw a flask of acid. You can do it with one attack. And yeah, speaking of changing attack rolls for saving throws, these are the rules for the net now. Net had terrible rules in the old player's handbook. So we saw this one in the playtest, and it has gone through as you saw it. So there's no more disadvantage if you're in melee and disadvantage if you're out of melee because you're suddenly at long range for some reason. That was silly stuff, but now we're just getting a dexterity saving throw, and we don't have to worry about any of that anymore. Also, that old rule, which was kind of silly about the net only being damaged by slashing damage, not by fire damage or acid damage for some reason, that's gone too. There are lots of ways to destroy the net now. Okay, you're probably seeing a weird cut because I'm adding this after it occurs to me that I forgot to add in all the changes to tools and crafting. So let's talk about those. So this is the new player's handbook, and you can see when we look at artisan's tools, it's showing us first we get the gold, then we get what ability score we use to use the tool, what the weight is, Utilize. And then, so for alchemist supplies, it says identify a substance, DC 15, or start a fire, DC 15. So it tells you what you can do with the tool. And then what items you can craft. So you could craft acid flasks, alchemist fire flasks, component pouches, oil, paper, or perfume with alchemist supplies, and then brewer supplies and calligrapher supplies, and so on. And then we are given these rules for crafting equipment. So to craft non-magical item, you need tools, raw materials, and time, each of which is detailed below. If you meet the requirements, you can make the item, and you can use it or sell it at its normal price. Tools, this chapter's tools section lists which tools are required to make certain items, as we just went over. The DM assigns required tools for items not listed here. You must use the required tool to make an item and have proficiency with that tool. Anyone who helps you must also have proficiency with it. Raw materials. In order to make an item, you need raw materials worth half its purchase cost, rounded down. For example, you guys know how to round, right? Okay, and then time. To determine how many days, working 8 hours a day, it takes to make an item, divide its purchase. Cost in gold by 10, round to a fraction, up to a day. For example, blah, blah, blah. You get it. You get it. Characters combine their efforts to shorten the crafting time, divide the time needed to create an item by the number of characters working on it. Normally, one other character can assist you, but the DM might allow for more assistance. Then let's talk about brewing potions of healing. A character who has proficiency with the herbalism kit can create a potion of healing. Doing so requires using that kit and 25 gold pieces of raw material over the course of 1 day or 8 hours of work. And as I believe is common knowledge now, healing potions are now a bonus action to consume. What the rules do not tell you is, because I've seen this question, what about all the other potions in the game? Are they also going to be bonus action? And the answer is, I don't know, because that's not said in the player's handbook. All they do is, under the text of healing potion, they tell you it is a bonus action to consume or to administer to somebody else. So whether it's going to be a bonus action for the rest of the potions, we're going to have to wait to the Dungeon Master's Guide to find out. But anyway, that's how you brew a potion of healing. It also gives rules for scribing spell scrolls. A spellcaster can transfer a spell to a scroll and create a spell scroll using the rules below. Time and cost. Scribing a scroll takes an amount of time and money based on the level of the spell, as shown in the spell scroll cost table. For each day of inscription, you must work for 8 hours. If a scroll requires multiple days, those days needn't be consecutive. Prerequisites for the scribe. To scribe a scroll, you must have proficiency in the Arcana skill or with calligrapher's tools and have the spell prepared on the day of the inscription. If I'm a spellcaster, I'm going to either have the Arcana skill or the proficiency in calligrapher's supplies, because I'm going to want to have access to this. You must also have at hand any material components required for the spells. If the spell consumes its material components, they are consumed only when you complete the scroll. Scroll's spell uses your spell save DC and the attack bonus, so scrolls work the same. Cantrips. If the scribe scroll is a cantrip, the version of the scroll works if the caster were your level. And here are the spell scroll costs, and you can see a cantrip takes a day, costs 15 gold pieces, right up to a 9th level spell takes 120 days, and costs 50,000 gold pieces. And actually, while we're on the topic of equipment, I should mention, because I have seen some questions from people wondering if there would be any changes to the weapons from the playtest, and the answer is no. So if you read the playtest, the last version of weapons that you saw, that's what's in the player's handbook. If you are just looking off the old 2014 player's handbook, the difference will be that weapons now have a mastery property, and if you are playing a 2014 character, you will not have access to these, so it's not going to matter to you. Now, I know this is public, but these are the old rules for inspiration, the old rules for gaining them and expending them, and some DMs actually use these rules. A lot of DMs don't bother with them or forget about them. They're not that great. I mean, you have to expend them before you make the roll, so the new rule I prefer. It's now changed to heroic inspiration, and your DM might give it to you. And if you're a human, you might get it on your own after a long rest. And if another character has the musician origin feat, they might award it to you as well after any rest. Instead of giving advantage, heroic inspiration now allows you to just re-roll any die after rolling it. This includes tests. This includes damage rolls. This includes, if you roll hit points when you level up, it would include that as well. It would include wild magic surges for wild magic sorcerers. I mean, basically, as long as you roll a die, you can use Heroic Inspiration to re-roll that die. It does say if you originally rolled more than one die, like let's say you had advantage on an attack roll, you can only re-roll one of them. And just like before, if you want to give your inspiration to somebody else, you can. These are the old rules for Exhaustion, and if you have them memorized, I don't. I could tell you what the first level does, I could tell you what the sixth level does, and while it's on my screen, I could tell you what the other effects did, but I always had to look this up if somebody had more than one level of Exhaustion, and I did not like these rules, and I was hoping they would change them, and they did. So here is the new Exhaustion condition. It is still really bad to have. I've always said you don't want Exhaustion. Exhaustion is bad to have, and it's hard to get rid of. That's still the case, but this is going to be easier to remember. And the progression is linear. It makes sense. While you have the Exhaustion condition, you experience the following effects. Exhaustion levels. This condition is cumulative. Each time you receive it, you gain one Exhaustion level, and you die if your Exhaustion level is 6, which is the same. D20 tests affected. When you make a D20 test, so ability check, saving throw, attack roll, the roll is reduced by 2 times your Exhaustion level. So 1 level of Exhaustion, that's -2 penalty on basically everything. And 5 levels of Exhaustion is -10. That's, you're not going to succeed at anything. Then your speed is reduced. Your speed is reduced by a number of feet equal to 5 times your Exhaustion level. So you're losing 10 feet per level of Exhaustion. And then removing Exhaustion levels is the same. After a long rest, you remove 1 of your Exhaustion levels, and when your Exhaustion level reaches 0, the condition ends. Look how much less space this uses up. It still is devastating, and I think this is something that I can actually memorize. So, great job with Exhaustion. Okay, so we are getting close here. So about a month ago, Wizards of the Coast was releasing reveal videos for the new Player's Handbook, and they did one on spell changes that I was hoping would go over a couple rules that are actually about spells, and they didn't really. They just kind of vaguely talked about how spells were changing and were enhanced. It did not give us a lot of information. So that was a tough video to react to. But one comment on that video that I got was, and I quote, "Do they still have the rule where you can't cast 2 leveled spells on the same turn?" And I am so grateful. I will never again have to explain that there is no such rule. There is this stupid rule that you see up on your screen right now. It prevents you casting any other spell than a cantrip on a turn that you cast a spell with a bonus action. And I could explain how that's different than not being able to cast 2 leveled spells on your turn, but I am done with that. Forever! Yay! Now, I thought they'd just get rid of this rule and replace it with nothing. That is not what happened. They did replace this rule, and here is the new rule. It says 1 spell with a spell slot per turn. On a turn, you can expend only 1 spell slot to cast a spell. This rule means that you can't, for example, cast a spell with a spell slot using the magic action and another one using a bonus action on the same turn. So how is this different? I'd be happy to answer that. First off, you can cast a cantrip with your bonus action, and now you can cast a spell with a spell slot with your action. This will be great if you have something like Shillelagh, which used to prevent you from casting anything but a cantrip with your action. Oh, and remember, if you were watching the reveal videos, they did one for the wizard, and they talked about the illusionist, and the illusionist can now cast minor illusion as a bonus action. Well, they can do that, and then cast a leveled spell with a spell slot with their action. That's going to be nasty. The new illusionist is really good. And I should also mention this old rule only applied if you cast a spell with your bonus action. So, if you got an additional action somehow, like through Action Surge, you could cast 2 leveled spells just fine. Now, it's just 1 spell with a spell slot on your turn. Doesn't care how you cast them. Bonus action, whatever. And this is the biggest one I noticed here, or the biggest one that got me thinking. So you know how a lot of species allow you to cast leveled spells without spell slots, like once per long rest. And feats like Magic Initiate or Fey Touched, which is in the new player's handbook, so is Shadow Touched. They let you cast spells without a spell slot. Or there are class features now, like the Paladin's Divine Smite, or Find Steed, which is an action to cast, or the Ranger's Hunter's Mark, the Land Druid's Land's Aid. All of these you can cast without expending a spell slot, so you can totally cast 2 leveled spells on your turn when you use one of them, as long as you don't spend a spell slot for both of them. And I have to say, I really like this. It opens up a lot of thoughts about new ways to optimize characters, which I'm always big on. And this is easy to remember. You can only cast 1 spell with a spell slot per turn. Doesn't matter if it's a leveled spell or a bonus action spell. Did you expend a spell slot to cast a spell? Yes. Well, you can't expand another one to cast another spell, period. And that's it. And I like how it makes you look at all these features that allow you to cast a spell without expending a spell slot, just a little bit differently. Like all the impressions you've had up to now of these kinds of features, it's time for you to reevaluate them because of this rule. Now, I'm going to mention one thing, like this is a change. I want to mention something that frustrated me that didn't change. Let me pull it up on your screen. Components. All right, so we got verbal, somatic, and material components. And no change, which means that if you are holding a spell focus and you want to complete the somatic components of a spell with that hand, you can if the spell has a material component, and you can't if it doesn't. And that is confusing and silly, and it should just be that if you're holding the spell focus for a spell which is from your class from which you get the focus, you can complete the somatic component and you don't have to worry about whether it has a material component or not. They didn't do that, and I can't believe they didn't do that. So yeah, that was not fixed, and it is frustrating to me. And all those other rules in your old player's handbook, because we've really covered only a small percentage of them, they're the same. A lot of them are worded differently, a lot of times they're formatted differently, and a lot of times they're condensed. Sometimes they're in a different chapter now. But if it's a rule that's not about character creation or advancement, and I haven't covered it in this video, then essentially it works the same. Unless I missed something, which is absolutely possible. But I think I caught all the important stuff. Now I want to recognize all the mage level patrons of this channel who are vital to me creating this content. Mr. Wonderful, Babrak, Blue Wolf, Cinnamon, John D, Descarpus9, El Conquistadorito, I can't believe I can say that the first time every time now. Hatap, Jared Huberger, John Wayne, Joseph Robideau, Wu Carl Kong, Michael Michelle, Moxie, Nemo, Paul Suzak, Prometheo NTG, Rico, Ryan Wilmot, Shane and Todd Beyond, Simon Jester, Somnariel, Stephen Moline, Earshine Third, and Wade One Take. How about that on camera? Now, it is time for me to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Tune back in tomorrow as I start going over spells. I'll see you then.